Rainy days don't seem so wet. Stormy nights don't stay. From the moment that we met, you were worth the wait. Oh, this could be the best thing that I'll ever know. Talk for hours and never slept. Two silhouettes on the concrete steps. We watched the sun as it slowly crept from the horizon to the place we met. Oh, this could be the best thing that I'll ever know.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Todd Wilkinson. I'm a longtime journalist, and I'm with Yellowstonian.org. But I've been writing about the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem for several decades. Tonight is a special night for all of you tuning in, and you're tuning in from across the country, not only in the Northern Rockies, from Seattle to Durham, North Carolina, from the upper Midwest to Houston and every place in between. It's really a testament, the fact that you're here, of not only your interest in grizzly bears and your love for the natural world and our public lands, but your head is spinning like all of ours are. Tonight we have two very passionate people. We have, of course, Tom Mangelsen, renowned wildlife photographer and good friend of mine, who more than anyone else chronicled the life of Grizzly 399, and we'll talk about her tonight and other issues related to grizzly bear conservation. And we also have with us Dr. Christopher Servheen, another friend who for 35 years headed federal grizzly bear recovery for the United States of America, was responsible, along with his colleagues, in bringing grizzly bears literally back from the brink in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem and Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. Before we begin tonight, I just want to say a couple of things. One is, what we have in this country is something that's envied around the world by other nations. The fact that we have public lands, that they belong to all of us, and we have this complement of laws that protect the public lands. We have the Endangered Species Act that was crucial in bringing bears back from maybe slightly more than 100 animals in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Grizzly bears were listed, given federal protection as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act in 1975. So we are in the 50th year of grizzly bear protection, and during that half century, they've not been hunted in the Northern Rockies. And there are lots of things happening right now. There are political efforts underway to remove them from federal protection. What does that mean for bears? Well, we're going to talk to Tom and Chris tonight about that. We're going to be talking about Grizzly Bear 399 and what her legacy is. This is a sad, solemn time, springtime here in the Northern Rockies. Bears are out of their den. We're going to talk about what's happening with public lands. We're going to be talking about a lot of things, and it's just a great delight that you all are here. And I hope you find the conversations that we're about to have to be nurturing for your passion and your thoughts about this miracle that we have in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So one of the things is, I want to get to it right off the bat. For the first time in 39 years, first time in 29 years, since 1996, Grizzly 399 has not wandered out of her den and come down into Jackson Hole. And I'm wondering, Tom, if you could perhaps provide a few observations of how does this feel, talking about you anticipating and many others, friends in Jackson Hole and around the world who would anticipate this. How do you feel this spring?
Well, we flashed a picture up there of Dave Mattson, our dear friend. And I'd like to just read a few words about what I think about more right this moment, seeing Dave's beautiful face on the screen. We lost Dave a couple of months ago. Grizzlies, cougars, and the wild earth lost one of their greatest champions. Bigger than life, a person I find most difficult to describe. For those of us who knew him as a friend, his loss is heart-wrenching. For those wild places and wild animals out there, David's loss is incalculable. There are few who had courage, the knowledge, intellect, and honesty to stand up to the most aggressive cougar, wolf, and bear haters. Regardless of personal threats to him, his loving partner, Louisa Wilcox, or potential loss of his career, he never flinched. Since the Craighead brothers, Frank and John, there hasn't been a grizzly bear scientist or researcher more dedicated, as important, and as passionate as David. He added greatly to the studies of the Craigheads. Incredibly prolific, David authored or co-authored 1,000 scientific papers, gave hundreds of lectures and talks to publish the facts. As a prominent grizzly and cougar scientist, with such deep respect from thousands who depend on his findings and advocacy, like myself and many of his colleagues, he remained a humble man with bright blue eyes, a beautiful smile, wry wit and humor, a thoughtful and amazing intellect. He fought to protect what he loved. Yes, a Renaissance man indeed. However, even that term seems to fall short, and likely for many of those who knew him. So to answer, we talk about such loss, it's been a difficult year for many people for many reasons. And the loss of someone like David really is terribly sad. I knew him. He helped me when I started the Cougar Fund, and he studied cougars for many years in the Southwest and many years of grizzly in the Northwest. And whenever I called him or wanted advice of a professional, I don't consider myself a cougar biologist or bear biologist, but when I needed answers and truthful answers and honesty, I would call David and Louisa. So I thank David and Louisa for being there for me. So that's my first thanks. Your question about going out now after almost 20 years of beyond the park, from 2006 until now, it's different. I haven't been only in the park 3 times this spring looking for bears. Normally I would have been out 2 weeks ago from sunrise to sunset, hoping to see 399 or one of her offspring, 610 or someone else. But I found being out there yesterday was beautiful blue sky day, bluebird day as we call it, almost 70 degrees here. Today is a blizzard, which is typical. But I just found it very peaceful and quiet, but it lacked the magic of, 399 not being possible to see. So it's a difficult time, but there are other bears, and The park's beautiful, and I will still go out. I'm not gonna, abandon the bears or anything, but it's just a different kind of season.
Thank you for that, Tom. And we hope you'll elaborate as the evening goes on tonight. Chris, what's it like for you these days of a longtime scientist? An important part of the community to which Dave Mattson and many other very bright minds have belonged throughout the Northern Rockies, with the Grizzly Bear study team, with the committee of you bringing people together. There's this structure in place that evolved over the last 50 years to recover grizzlies, and that made that approach to recovery something, again, that was emulated around the world, of bringing back an animal really hard to recover. And as you see today, and as a private citizen, you are on the board of the Montana Wildlife Federation. You're involved with IUCN on bear conservation around the world. How is these times, how are they landing on you? This whole structure put in place to recover bears that is kind of under threat these days. So if you could elaborate on that a bit, I would be grateful.
Well, these are certainly desperate times. I think that's the best word to use here. We've had decades of effort to bring grizzly bears back from the edge. And if it wasn't for the Endangered Species Act, we wouldn't have grizzly bears in the Yellowstone ecosystem today. And despite that, we have people in the government who are actively trying to destroy the laws that were the foundation for recovering bears and many other species and managing their habitat. And then we have the threats to the civil servants who work in the agencies, that the Forest Service, the Park Service, all these places where grizzly bears live, and the managers that work for the public in these places and work for us and for grizzly bears are under grave threat from the government. And it's just baffling to me why people would be so destructive, trying to destroy something that has created such benefits for us in terms of the healthy ecosystems and places we have. And Yellowstone is probably the best example of a place that is full of all the native species, because we worked hard to bring them back and to keep them healthy. And that the people that did all that are under grave threat right now from the United States government, from people in the government who are trying to destroy the agencies. They're trying to destroy the study team, which was the team of scientists of which Dave Mattson was a member, that created the foundation that we use to build the recovery of grizzly bears. And if the study team goes away, then we will lose our ability to monitor and understand the grizzly bears. And we could lose, it could be the start of the demise of grizzly bears once again in the Yellowstone ecosystem. By taking away our eyes and our knowledge about what's going on with the bears, we'll never be able to respond to help them out if they start to turn around and go down again. And this is actively being done by people that don't know what they're destroying, and they don't know why. And it's just unbelievable to me that this level of destruction of agencies, of career scientists, of the natural world that we live in is going on today. And without the people standing up and just, being outraged and speaking up and speaking against it. So it's really disheartening for me. I spent 35 years working on grizzly bear recovery, and I've been 10 years out of the government and worked really hard to keep bears healthy on the landscape. And we see people in Washington, D.C. are actively trying to destroy everything that we built over the past 45 years. It's really discouraging and desperate.
I want to put a fine point on this so that people who are tuning in understand just how dire this is. That if we break the institutions and destroy the morale of people working for those institutions, if we break the scientific method, and if we're not protecting habitat now and it suffers permanent, irreversible loss, what are the chances of us being able to rescue bears if we put them in peril or drive them down again?
Well, I think they will go down again if this all continues. I mean, if we look at the cumulative number of threats to grizzly bears across the landscape, from more and more people living in bear habitat, more and more people recreating in bear habitat, and now mandates to increase timber harvest, to increase oil and gas production, all in grizzly bear habitat. And at the same time, you're going to take away the people that can monitor the impacts and tell us what needs to be done to reverse these threats to grizzly bears and help the bears out. I mean, the end result will be the demise of bears once again, and all the tens of millions of dollars that we put into bringing grizzly bears back in the Yellowstone system will just be wasted. It'll be gone. And how can this mindless type of destruction, and it's not just grizzly bears, it's the NASA, it's the National Institutes of Health, it's the Weather Service, it's everything that's being destroyed. And why is this being done? And it's just a desperate thing. And I almost feel like we've been occupied by an alien life form that is trying to destroy our country from inside.
We'll get to more of that in a minute. Tom, I want to ask you, and then I also want this question to go to Chris because it's top of mind for lots of people who have followed 399. The last cub that she had was nicknamed Spirit. And what do you think the odds of survival are for Spirit? And Tom, take us to that dark day in October last year. Share a few of your thoughts, and what do you think the odds of her survival are? And then I want that question turned to Dr. Servheen as well.
Yeah, it's a really challenging question, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it and thinking about what happened.
Just, Tom, one quick second.
Yeah.
I just want to point out to our viewers that is a photograph of 399 that you took a year ago with Spirit at her side. As you've said, because she was a single cub, Spirit was a single cub, got a lot of mom's attention, and so was Large. So I just wanted to point that out so people understand what they're seeing there.
Thank you, Todd. I think what I'll do, rather than belabor it just about her, I don't think I can say what Spirit's chances of survival are without giving some background. So Spirit's a yearling, almost 18 months or so in that picture, and October 22nd, when 399 got hit by a car in Snake River Canyon about 40 miles south of Jackson, and about 70 miles or 75 miles south of where her natal den was. But the more I've learned about what happened, I've gone sort of out of mourning in a way to anger, and then people say, well, that's part of mourning and all that, but I think it's a little different because I don't feel that 399 needed to die that way. And although she was 28 years old, she had surprised all of us with having 4 cubs and 3 cubs, and we'll go into that later, but she was a marvelous bear, as Chris will attest to. But when I heard about her getting run over on October 22nd, in the morning, I got several calls that said that there might have been an accident with 399. We don't know. And it was all confusing. A lot of rumors. People said, no, it's just a rumor. And my assistant Tiffany and I went down to the Hot Springs, which is a place that 399 often goes. She went down there a few years earlier. And I couldn't figure out why she was going down there. Nobody could, actually. We had a lot of different thoughts. You know, maybe there's berries down there. Maybe there's more berries down there than in the park. Maybe there's some gut piles or discarded carcasses of deer, elk. There's early elk season down there and deer season in September, earlier than around Jackson. But I learned that she had been feeding on an elk carcass that she and her cub Spirit pulled off the road, where somebody actually saw she and Spirit 399 Spirit pull the elk carcass off the highway and then was feeding on it. And then there was a number of other people. And it was the day before. It was the evening before that people were taking pictures and video and documenting her and her cub. And before that, or after that, it seemed like there was another bear with two cubs, another grizzly. And I was flabbergasted why there was no federal agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service or Game and Fish or anybody, USGS, down there removing the carcass, number one, and or patrolling the area, and or no, there weren't any signs. And I became really upset about all that, because not only she's the most famous bear that's ever lived, but she's the most famous animal that's probably ever lived. So although the different agencies spent some time protecting her legitimately, and there's good people certainly out there in the agencies that were trying to do that, I'm not criticizing everybody at this, but it was certain individuals and people who had the power that could have done much better. And I seriously believe 399 would still be with us today, unless something else happened, of course. But so people knew, the authorities knew, Fish and Game knew, Dan Thompson, who's the head of the large carnivore biology and for the Fish and Game, probably Hillary Cooley, who's head of the Fish and Wildlife Service Recovery, just had to know that 399 was down there, and this other bear, this other grizzly. It doesn't matter if it's 399 or another grizzly, still endangered species and rare animals. But so the evening before, there was a guy, and I think I might just read what kind of happened from the report that Billy Arnold and Jacksonville News and Guide wrote, because he did some investigation and stuff. But Dan Thompson, Billy Arnold had interviewed Dan Thompson for an article about the bears being south on the Monday before. So it's like, well, the March 21st or March 20th, but March 21st, the day before. Sorry, October 21st, the day before she was killed, Billy Arnold interviewed Dan Thompson, and they talked about hunters beware down in the canyon because the grizzlies are moving south. And there was nothing said about grizzlies being on the road or the highway, and there was pictures of the bears being on the highway down there. And, you know, Dan Thompson was worried about telling hunters to wear bear spray or have bear spray and know how to use it, and, you know, go with another partner and beware. And so I thought it was odd that there was no one down there to, you know, protect her. But so I'm going to read what happened after that. And it says the first tips reached the Wyoming Game and Fish Department the evening of October 21st. One came from Travis Carlson, who was driving the Snake River Canyon around 6 p.m. on his way from Jackson home to Star Valley. He saw cars piled up on the side of the highway near Dog Creek feed ground and the Pritchard boat ramp. At first, Carlson thought there had been an accident. Then he saw a bear on the side of the highway eating an elk carcass that had been there for about a week. He inched past the vehicles, which were stopped to watch. He caught a glimpse of a second bear a bit farther off the road, tucked up against some willows. Carlson didn't stick around for long. He started getting nasty looks from the wildlife watchers who heard his dog barking. He continued down the canyon to Alpine and cell service. Alpine is about 5 miles further, 10 miles further down the road. He called Kyle Lash, game warden for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, at 6:27 p.m. I said, "You better get up there. This ain't going to go well," he recalled. Carlson wasn't concerned about the bears being hit. Rather, he worried about somebody getting too close to the bears at the roadkill dinner and getting their ass chewed up, he said. He had no idea that the bear could have been 399 until 2 days later when the news broke. The famous grizzly had been killed by a car in the Snake River Canyon the evening of October 22nd. That's about 36 hours after this event. But Lash, who had heard about the bears, game warden, on the carcass from Carlson and other commuters Monday, had a hunch that the bear was 399. He called Rebecca Lyon, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Grizzly Bear Conflict Specialist, who was hired in part to keep an eye on 399. I called Becca last said. She's the head gal that's been monitoring that bear. I told her that there was a sow grizzly bear with a cub down there. I said it could be 399 and her cub. Lash told Carlson it wasn't a game and fish issue, but rather a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issue. Even though Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho are petitioning the federal government to remove grizzlies' endangered species protection, return the management over to the states, and allow hunting in Greater Yellowstone, federal wildlife managers still have jurisdiction over them, Dan Thompson, Game and Fish Large Carnivore Supervisor, said. Responsibility for carcass disposal falls to a number of different agencies and individuals. The Wyoming Department of Transportation picks up some carcasses, as do some contractors in Game and Fish, which typically handles roadside carcasses if bears are nearby, he said. Generally speaking, yes, Thompson said. If we get a report of a carcass and there's bears involved, we usually try to rectify that situation as swiftly as possible. Now, I find that kind of, I'm just asking, I don't know what, if the normal thing is doing it swiftly, and there's 2 or 3 reports that there was a carcass there from, this man said 5 to 7 days, another person said for 7 days. Why the hell wasn't somebody there taking it away, carcass, hazing the bears off the road and stuff like that? So that's number one. And the gentleman that hit the bear was questioned. He seemed, a lot of people were upset with him and sent hate mail. Nobody knew who he was. I don't even know his name, and I don't want to, actually. I don't know. As far as I could tell, it was an accident. But he had dodged, apparently, what he said was, he had dodged 399 in the middle of the highway. I'm sorry, he dodged 399 and swerved and hit. I'm sorry, he dodged. It's getting to me. He dodged Spirit and hit 399, and she was found in the barrow ditch, later dead. But there's so many reports, and Hillary Cooley reported, she didn't say anything she couldn't get interviews except for almost 4 or 5 weeks. She said that there was a number of complaints down in Star Valley area where she was hit the month before, that she had gotten, the 2 had gotten into some horse feed and beehives or garbage or whatever. And so they had reports of her being down there in September. And there were a lot of people who knew that she was down there in September. And she'd gone there down with her 4 cubs in 2020. So it was well known. It wasn't just like she popped in and nobody knew about it. And the agencies, I don't know what the word is, but irresponsible would be a light term, I guess. I won't go there. But I think what happened over the last couple of years, she's gone down to that area south of Jackson to look for roadkills. 2 days earlier, she was seen, and I saw her on the RKL road up by Signal Mountain. That's about 30, 40 miles from here. And then she went, 30 miles south So in like 3 days, she went from down there up to Arkell, where there's a dump site where the roadkills are dumped and have been for years and years. And she would go there regularly, as other bears would. It was a good place to go, but it was also dangerous because other bears, wolves, would be there. And if you have cubs, it's dangerous for a mom like 399 to be around, other bears and that. But down in South, there's very little competition for, say, food like a roadkill. So I think she just learned. She's so intelligent, as all bears are, but that she could get a free meal. So she probably went north to Arkell Road, and somebody else was probably there, other bears or wolves or whatever, or maybe there were 7 carcasses, but there were a few days before. But she decided to go back to Dog Creek, and then she was on this carcass. So she learned that there was free meals on the highway down there. There was another elk killed on the October 21st at night. It was another carcass, so there was 2 then. And there's a worst highway going in and out of Jackson. It's curvy, it's Snake River Canyon. The hillsides are pretty barren for the most part, and steep. It'd be hard to travel. So she has to either travel in the river bottom or on the highway. Of course, she's going to travel on the highway. That's the easiest way to get from point A to point B. And it's just unconscionable for me to think that there really was nobody there to protect her. No lights, flashing, no. There was this one part-time person apparently, but she wasn't there. And there was no reason for it. Absolutely no reason that there wasn't some agency personnel there with flashing lights, and or these, big signs like that were often up in different places in the park, flashing signs. You could change a message on them, beware of bears, slow speed, beware of deer, whatever. But the Fish and Wildlife Service spokesman said, well, we have signs down there, but they were just these triangle signs with a deer jumping, which we've all seen a million times. They think, okay, well, slow down for 10 minutes and then, forget about it. But why wasn't there signage? And here's a picture of the road. And that's the kind of sign that the Fish and Wildlife spokesperson from DC or wherever he was said they had. This is one they had going south, and they had one at the other end going north. It's about a 10-mile stretch here, but they should have had, I don't know if there's a picture there of the LED sign. Siler, can you find that one maybe? So these are the kind of signs that I'm talking about that warn people, and you can change it, and they have a trailer hitch on them so that it's easy to move. You just back up your truck or whatever and hitch it up, and you can move it, and just the bears are only 10 minutes from the little town of Alpine. And unfortunately, the game fish guy that got these calls, he called the Fish and Wildlife Service, and he should have obviously gone out there right away, but everything was delayed. He had to check with the authorities. And the game fish are part of the interagency grizzly bear study team. They are part of it. And they're the ones that usually have given the authority from the Fish and Wildlife Service into endangered species to euthanize bears. So they're used to this all the time. They pick up bears, they set traps for bears, they euthanize bears. So the fact that this was not a priority, that 399 was on the highway eating a carcass literally 5 feet off the road, is insanity. So I'm back to the question: what is Spirit still alive? Well, after they hauled away 399 in the back of a pickup truck, no one has seen Spirit since then. And I have friends who walked every trail down there, who walked every back road or drove every back road looking for. There was snow, it was a little bit of snow on the ground, so they would have been easy to see a bear's tracks. From my experience, whenever 399 lost a cub, she lost one about 10 years ago or so named Snowy. And Snowy was hit by a hit and run driver at dusk up near Pilgrim Creek. And 399 went out on the roadside and picked up Snowy in her mouth. This is a picture of Snowy. And typical bear jam. And she picked me up on the middle of the road in her mouth and took about 50 yards off the highway and put it next to a dead spruce tree. And then she ran up and down the highway. 399 ran down the highway all night, bawling and like crying again. Described it way different than but she didn't realize that she had lost. It didn't register like what we always say. Well, Joe died, and we always say, "Oh, I can't believe it." Well, of course, that's what we think. So we're not that different. But she didn't quite register that Snowy was dead, but she went crazy up and down the highway. I've seen other bears, Stan, Felicia, when they lose her cubs, both the cubs run up and down the highway looking for mom, or up and down the field, and mom goes the same way looking for their lost cubs. Temporarily lost cubs most of the time. So I would think that spirit would have not gone anywhere, would have stayed right there or near there, and then would have backtracked on the scent, which I've seen other bears, her and 610, backtracked on her mother's footsteps, and probably was on the highway backtracking. So that's just the way bear behavior is. They feel a loss. They're sentient, they're intelligent, they feel pain, they feel tragedy. They feel like mom's important, kids are important, just like we do go crazy kind of. So I don't know if spirit. I don't believe spirit went up in the high country and settled down in some den. And there's no way that no one would have seen her him or her. We don't know which sex it was. It's a big cub, but it's by itself. Who knows it? I would think it might be a male, but don't know. But him or her to go back to her natal den, it would be 75 miles without mom would be unlikely. But maybe he or she did go up into the mountains and hibernate, and maybe he or she will show up. But with that knowledge, I think people can draw the conclusion, maybe, or hopefully you can hope for miracles, I suppose. But what pissed me off more was that even after 399 was killed, there were no signage, no people there for spirit. Why wasn't there somebody there with flashing lights and putting up signs and worried about the most famous bear cub now, probably, life? I know. So it's all really poses a big question to me, and I haven't gotten any answers from the authorities or what happened. But there's a lot of noise about, well, they went and tried to look for the carcass at night. Well, they didn't see the carcass at night, but anyway, I don't know what happened, but I do hope spirit shows up. That would be so great.
All right. Thank you for that, Tom. Thank you. I know a lot of people are interested in the recap of what happened. Chris, you as National Grizzly Bear Recovery Coordinator dealt with hundreds of bears that died. And some of those involved cubs that were orphaned. We had spoken about this earlier. What do you think the odds are that Spirit survived? Do you think Spirit would have made it back into Pilgrim Creek? And if Spirit did survive, will we know who Spirit is? So those are the three questions. What do you think?
Well, bears, their lives reflect what their mothers taught them to do. And in that way, bears have a culture, this behavior and knowledge of their environment that is transmitted from mothers to offspring. So Spirit knows where she went with her mother or his mother, and and I would expect that eventually Spirit will reflect where 399 was if Spirit is still alive. That he or she will show up somewhere. The probability of Spirit living, I think, is pretty good because that was a pretty good sized cub of the year, fairly late in the year. It should have been sufficiently in physical shape that it could have survived the denning period. We know that orphan cubs can survive, and particularly if they're large and they're orphaned late in the fall. And they'll go up and they know enough to dig a den somewhere, and then they can winter and come out. The question is going to be what that cub Spirit does this spring, because she or he is probably going to go where 399 took her or him, and many of those places were close to people, close to human habitations, and those are risky places for bears to be. You know, when bears are in their 2, 3, or 4-year-old age, they act like human teenagers. They take risks. They're exploring their environment. They're learning what they can get away with and what they can't. When they're with their mother is teaching them to stay away from things and to avoid certain places and certain things. You know, is it possible that Spirit learned enough from 399 that he or she could survive? I think that's possible. But I know that without a mother bear, a 2-year-old grizzly bear is going to have a riskier time this spring, if indeed he or she survived the denning period. When he or she comes out, she's going to be in the Jackson Valley with lots of risks, whether it's bear jams or people or food or residences. All those things are going to be encountered as this Spirit bear walks around in the place that she went with her mother. And it's going to be risky. And I hope for the best, but, you know, Spirit doesn't have enough experience to survive in that kind of risky environment without a lot of great care on the part of the people that live there. The people that live in the Jackson Valley have done something in terms of securing foods and garbage and not having attractants out and about that bring bears in. That's good, but that's going to have to continue for bears like Spirit and others to survive in the Jackson Valley. You know, this bear will have little experience on its own living around people. And those day-to-day decisions are going to be what determines whether it survives or not. But I would expect that, Tom, as you go out in the park this spring, that you may see that Spirit again in places where you would expect to see 399, because if Spirit is out there and survived the winter, that bear is going to be in places where it knows to go because it went there with its mother. So I guess it'll be interesting to see if she is seen, and I expect that Tom will be able to recognize this bear if it is out there again.
I hope you're right, Chris. Thank you. I'll keep looking.
I want to ask both of you of how things have changed on the land. Tom, this is your 50th year roughly as a wildlife photographer. Bears have been listed for 50 years. Chris, you're 50 years involved with bears. If you look at what you've been doing, how has the landscape changed over that time? Because I really want to get at this. The issue of valleys filling up with a lot more people, areas that at one point people thought it might be secure habitat, allowing grizzly bears more latitude and to avoid these perils that they face. Tom, what have you seen in Jackson? This thing that you're looking at here is a progressional map that shows the number of new homes that are now dotting the landscape, and it takes us up through 2021, which does not have the full effect of all the people who moved here during the COVID. And why this is crucial in this state of Montana, if you look at roughly the left-hand side, the left western half of the state, that is the area where people think there's going to be connectivity between Greater Yellowstone and the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem and the Bitterroot. And so maybe let's start with Chris, and then I want to ask Tom of what he's seen in terms of development filling up, particularly the southern half of Jackson. So when you see a map like this, Chris, as the former National Recovery Coordinator who was optimistic at what comes to mind and what do we need to be paying attention to?
Well, this level of private land development is accelerating. It's bad now and it's accelerating. There's more and more every year. All these people are moving into grizzly bear habitat and they bring with them very little knowledge about how to live with bear habitat. And it's what we call the leading, bleeding edge of bear management and survival. As more humans move into bear habitat and more bears then encounter these humans. This is a great risk to grizzly bears across the landscape. And, they go to places to find seasonal foods. And in many places, these seasonal foods are like early spring foods at low elevation. That's where all the houses are. And the bears don't have any other place to go because the mountains are still full of snow. And so, the greatest threat to grizzly bears today is this intense level of residential development in grizzly bear habitat that is occurring throughout the Northern Rockies, from Jackson all the way to Canada and into Canada as well. So, I never expected to see the level of development that we see now. And COVID brought all these new people that learned that they could live in the Rockies and actually work in Los Angeles. And we have these people all over the place that come with all this money. They build a house in a forest environment right up against the national forest boundary. And then in the spring, bears show up in their yard and they call the Fish and Game Department and say, hey, there's a bear in my yard. What should I do? And we want to tell them to move, but we can't. No one is tearing houses down. They're just building them. And this is a huge problem and a challenge to keep grizzly bears and other wildlife on the landscape in the Northern Rockies with this level of human development out here.
Tom, you and many others looked out for 399 as she made these navigations from the northern public lands into southern Jackson Hole, and often perilous quests where one dog running loose could have gotten into it with her, horse feed, people being sloppy, recreationists, this whole thing. What is your concern as you cruise around Jackson Hole, the developed parts, and more widely in the ecosystem? What kind of a future do grizzly bears face with 399 as an example? Because, it was stressful to be trying to be a human chaperone for you and many others, trying to help guide her through this maze.
Well, we couldn't really guide her, but we documented it. But everything Chris has said is true about Jackson Hole, whether it's Montana, Bozeman, Missoula, or Jackson. But Jackson, especially in Wyoming, is a hot spot for people to come from wherever, all over. And more housing. There's a lot of housing going up for workers that come to Jackson. There's no place to live here. You can't afford it. You have to live like down in Alpine where 399 was basically headed. So that's Salt River Valley, even if it was grizzly, habitat. I don't think that's why she went there. I think she went there for roadkills, like I said. But whatever the habitat is, left there is being built up, and a lot of affordable housing, which is great for workers and people who can't afford to live in the valley. And you can't blame them. They want to work at a hotel, they want to go skiing, and they want to be in the park, be near the park. So it's a real conundrum about you can't really stop development except if you have a real comprehensive county plan, which Jackson has failed at pretty much. I think. They tried. Texas Conservation Alliance tried really hard for a long time. I was part of it. Remember when I first came here 45 years ago, but there's so much pressure from very wealthy people to build their mega mansions here. And they only pretty much live here maybe for 4, 5, 6 weeks a year. And they might even have 2 or 3 other houses somewhere else. But it's hard to stop the money and the power that these people have to think about whether, where to build their homes, because they want to be right where the grizzly bear habitat is and where all the animals are. But then they get here, but they don't want the grizzly bears in their yard. So they call the game fish, and then the game fish comes out and moves a grizzly bear. That's what happened with one of 399's cubs, 587. It was in the area, Pacific Creek, which is in holding the park. There's probably 30 or 40 homes there. And 399 would take her cubs there every year, and people would call each other and say, 399's eating the bluegrass, and she's back. It must be spring, But then there was some jackass that came from New Jersey, said, I don't want bears here. I don't want bears. So he calls the game fish. He walked around the development with his shotgun in his shoulder and his pistol on his hip, and he didn't like bears. Everybody else did, and she didn't do anything to anybody. She just loved to eat green grass when there was still snow on the ground. So the game fish comes, and they don't want the liability. If something happens, the guy's complaining. So they moved 587, and a week later, 2 weeks later, 587 came back. And then they moved again down south. They put it right in the middle of the cow country. Well, of course, look at these fat cows. I think I can take a couple of those. Well, that was the end of 587, and now she's a mounted stuffed trophy or whatever in the back of a U-Haul kind of trailer that they use for quote education, which I guess is best you can do in a way. But if the guy from where, I think he was from New Jersey, anyway, he was New Jersey, but he didn't have any tolerance. And why would he move in a place like this? This is probably the highest grizzly bear habitat in the park if he couldn't stand to live or accept bears in his yard. But so they killed 587, and that was it. And I think the biggest, the threat. So I think sprawl is, difficult, and I don't know what's going to happen. Places like Jackson or Bozeman, obviously you live in Bozeman, it's going crazy there. And all the valleys, like you said, it's great grizzly bear habitat. And unless we protect them in, places, parks or something, they're going to get developed.
I want to ask both of you about this new political environment and the environment of delisting, and the notion that we've achieved a numeric level of grizzly bears, and there are some who then believe that grizzly bears are expendable, or that there are, quote, surplus bears there to be, quote, harvested. I want to ask, Seiler, if you could project the image of the bloodline of 399, I would be grateful. So for viewers out there, I want you to take a careful look at this. This is the family tree, if you will, of Grizzly 399 singularly. And what it shows is 18 offspring. So roughly almost 20 years ago, 399 was feeding on a carcass with their first 3 cubs, one of which was 587 that Tom was talking about. And there is one bear from that threesome that survives, a daughter 610. But you have 18 offspring there, and then you're going to have offspring of offspring. So one single mother is responsible perhaps for 30 bears by keeping her alive. And what's poignant here is that Dr. Servheen, who has joined us tonight, along with Mary Gibson Scott, who was the superintendent of Grand Teton, made the decision that 399 and those cubs were feeding on a carcass. A human walked into them and got mauled, and they said that was natural behavior for 399 and spared her life. So the 399 story would never have even played out had she been taken out that day. This is really profound. So what are your thoughts, both of you, about where we are, and will states treat bears as expendable? What's the hazard of that people need to be aware of? So, Chris, if you could jump in, and then we'll have Tom follow up.
Oh, there are so many hazards. Where to begin here? I guess the first thing to say is that, the objective of the Endangered Species Act is to get listed species to the point at which protection under the Act is no longer required. So that's the objective of what we're supposed to do. The Endangered Species Act has factors that have to be met to change the status from listed to delisted. One of those is, are there enough animals to occupy the available space and the available habitat? Another is there sufficient habitat to support the animals so that healthy population can continue to live? And thirdly, are there adequate regulatory mechanisms in place to control mortalities and to manage the habitat after the Endangered Species Act no longer applies, so that when you pull the rug of the ESA out from underneath these animals, that they'll still remain on the landscape? And a lot of people talk about the fact that grizzly bears are recovered in the Yellowstone ecosystem because there's about 1,000 grizzly bears there now. But that's the number of bears only. That doesn't talk to the issue of, are there adequate regulatory mechanisms in place? And at this point, there are not adequate regulatory mechanisms in place for the future of grizzly bears if the Endangered Species Act did not apply. And so I want to just stress that right now, in 2025, the future for grizzly bears is increasingly uncertain. And I want to list some of these things that make grizzly bear survival really uncertain. The first is that climate change is changing bear food availability and distribution across the landscape. So the bears need to be able to move in order to find these moving food sources, whether it's going up in elevation or changing distribution and abundance. And there's higher mortality risk as they move across the landscape to move with climate change and the effects on food. Second is the issue that we just talked about, the accelerating level of private land development in grizzly bear habitat. This results in loss of habitat and increased mortality for grizzly bears as they encounter all these people on the landscape. Third is the increasing recreation pressure in grizzly bear habitat. We have accelerating levels of human use in the backcountry on public lands, where we have the result on bears is displacement for these animals. They have to go somewhere else to stay away from all the people, and increased stress as they try to avoid all these recreators in bear habitat. The fourth item is that there's more human-bear conflicts at developments because there are more new people. As Tom described, the guy that was now intolerant of bears, but he decided to move to bear habitat anyway. This results in more dead bears. The next item is the demise of the study team, which is the science arm that has brought us the science that allowed us to recover grizzly bears. If we lose the science on Yellowstone grizzly bears, then we will not know what the bears are doing. We will not know their changes in their vital rates like cub production and survival, distribution, and we won't be able to respond to their needs without monitoring them. The next item is, right now, we're seeing the decrease in agency staff, Forest Service, Park Service, BLM, all these people that are needed to manage bears and bear habitat and all the recreation in bear habitat. We're losing those very people because they're being terminated by the government right now. So you got increasing in recreation, you've got fewer people to manage it. Then we've got this pressure to increase extraction. We want, the administration wants more timber harvest. They want more oil and gas. All of this is going to be in grizzly bear habitat. And that's going to result in loss of habitat for bears and more displacement and mortality risk to bears. And finally, we're seeing the destruction of basic laws like the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Forest Management Act. all of these laws are being watered down or destroyed by the administration in Washington, which means there's fewer protections for bears and fewer protections for bear habitat. This is the perfect storm of disaster that is happening to grizzly bears since January 20th, 2025. And this is a desperate time. And we've gotten grizzly bears healthy right now. And it's taken a lot of effort, but I don't know that we can continue to have healthy bears with this perfect storm of disasters that's coming out of Washington, D.C. and being pressed on grizzly bears and grizzly bear habitat.
Thank you. Tom?
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate all that. As Chris knows, one of the hugest threats that you didn't touch on is that 2024, there was a record year for grizzly bear deaths by humans. And I think you've said, Chris, I think I read something about 80 to 90% of bear deaths are attributed to human activity and avoidable one way or another. Sometimes difficult, but avoidable. So in 2024, there was 65, 70 grizzlies that died that year from human activity that were recorded to the IGBST. And I think, Chris, you and most experts would say, Dave Mattson did, that you can multiply that for every one bear that's reported, there's another bear that's not reported. And I would guess it's actually probably more than that. But let's just say there's another bear that's not reported. So you take 70, multiply it by, one, two, you get 140. Now let's just round it up to 150 bears. And so you just said that there's a likelihood of 1,000 bears in the ecosystem. And now you've got 150 at least dead bears due to human activity, mostly from hunting and poaching. And of course, there's some car accidents, mostly from hunting and poaching. Now, correct me, Chris, if I'm wrong, but if you multiply it out, that's 15% of the population of grizzly bears. And what I've read is that you can't sustain a population if the loss per year is over 10%. So 2024 was 15%, maybe more. And if all this stuff happens that you just mentioned, like all the, losing the agency and all the research, and then we turn over, the bears are delisted, and we turn over the management to the game and fish. And if you look at just what I mentioned, obviously, what happened to 399, which is lack of management or shitty management, then there will be less protection, which is, again, I'm not trying to criticize a lot because there's a lot of good people out there, but 15% reduction in the population, from what I know, is too much. And we cannot add on to that more dead bodies of grizzly bears. Is that correct?
Well, the sustainable mortality limit is certainly 15% is very high. I don't think a grizzly bear population can sustain a 15% mortality every year. So they have a very low reproductive rate and low resilience to excessive mortality. So, if we have continuous years of high mortality like that, we'll certainly see a turnaround in the population. It'll start to decline over time.
And as Dave Mattson told me numerous times, that everybody wants to say the governor and the congressional delegation, we have Loomis and Hageman and Barrasso here, all think, there's an explosion of grizzly bears. And you said, and as Dave said, it's the core area is, he said, it still has the same number of grizzly bears as it did. It's not exploding, and they're not moving out of the Yellowstone ecosystem or core Yellowstone because there's exploding population, because there's a lack of food with climate change, like white bark pine and back when cutthroat trout, and now they're concentrating on moths in the high country. And what would happen if the moths, some disease or something and kill off the moths. Well, then you start going downhill from there. But I don't quite understand how the Game and Fish wants to, or all these congressional people, president included, would want to add on delisting into a population that's really, there is no surplus, obviously. Dave Mattson said for the last 20 years, the line of population is flat. Goes up a little bit, goes down a little bit, but basically flat. The trend is flat. So is that, I mean, that's what he says. Now, I don't know, you might feel differently, but if it is flat or going down a bit, and we have like a record year of deaths in grizzlies from human activity last year, then it sounds pretty desperate.
Yeah, well, the grizzly bear population is not increasing much, if at all, and it is stable. And grizzly bears are, as their density increases, their survival of subadults drops because adult males kill subadults. So what happens is when you get to a certain number of bears, they don't increase in numbers. They're pretty stable. And that's what we have in the Yellowstone system right now. They're basically at capacity, and they are not increasing in numbers over time. And there's not like a big surplus of bears out there.
On this point, we know from scientific studies that island populations of species wink out or decline faster. And Greater Yellowstone is an island population, still disconnected from the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, which is the other ecosystem with about another 1,000 bears. And then there are 4 other ecosystems roughly, right? Smaller, tiny populations. So at the end of the last administration, you had proposed a new way of thinking about how to achieve durable recovery instead of managing within island populations. And as the two of you have just expounded upon, this island population in Greater Yellowstone is facing numerous threats inside the ecosystem and on the fringes. As habitat fills up, more conflicts are going to be in store. Could you explain the metapopulation concept and why that's important? And I need to let viewers know that you were the author of the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan, penned nearly 40 years ago, that still is in effect. And what you tried to do was bring forward a new way of thinking about true recovery. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I did write the updated recovery plan in 1993. That's the current one that is still in place. And I wrote that with the idea of managing the recovery zones, the Yellowstone, the Northern Continental Divide, these other populations as different, separate places. Because at that time, I didn't think we could ever get those populations to connect naturally. And I thought we'd be really lucky to fill those islands by themselves, never mind connect them. But since that time, we have recognized, we scientists have recognized that managing for island populations is highly risky. It's not a very good way to manage populations at all, particularly animals like grizzly bears, which have a very low reproductive rate and low resilience. And I wrote a revised recovery plan outline that I submitted to the Fish and Wildlife Service in December of last year that suggested that we should manage all the populations as a single interconnected unit, what is called in science a metapopulation, where there's functional movement between those islands. And by doing that, we would increase the demographic resiliency of the populations. In other words, we could see females and males move between ecosystems. Therefore, they would be healthier. We'd increase the genetic resiliency of the systems so that males could move between ecosystems and genetic isolation would be eliminated. Right now, the Yellowstone population has been isolated for well over 100 years from any other grizzly bears. In the long term, it's going to be better to have genetically interconnected populations so that we don't lose genetic diversity. And finally, interconnected populations are going to have climate change resiliency so that the animals can move across the landscape and find the foods as the foods change in distribution and abundance, with changes in temperature, changes in snowfall, changes in precipitation, increased fires. Connected populations will have the resiliency to respond to all those climate change challenges. So it's a much better way to manage grizzly bears. That, in fact, is what the Fish and Wildlife Service suggested in their rule that they published in January of 2025, is instead of managing for islands and saying Yellowstone could be recovered and not the Northern Continental Divide, they said, let's look at them all as one unit, try to connect them and let the animals move between them, and then recover them as one big interconnected population that's more resilient. And if we get to that, that would be a true recovery for grizzly bears and would increase their long-term survival probabilities.
And how close are we to achieving that right now?
Well, the grizzly bears are trying to move across the landscape. They are moving out of the islands. They haven't connected between Yellowstone and the Northern Continental Divide yet. They're about 60 miles apart. And
but connectivity, I just want to ask, just to have contact is not a viable population in the between make, right? So, I mean, even if they connect, it's going to be a while before there's like a viable population between Yellowstone and the Northern Continental Divide, right?
Well, we want to see the intervening habitat between those islands manage to facilitate the movement of bears and the survival of bears in those places. Eventually, we'll see the highest densities in the islands, in the Yellowstone ecosystem, in the Northern Continental Divide, which is the Glacier Bob Marshall complex. Part of the Bob Marshall is that scene behind me. We want the highest densities in the places that are the biggest blocks of public land, but we still want bears to be able to move across the landscape so that they can reconnect and we can have genetic and demographic exchange in the long term.
So I want both of you to jump in here, and I want Tom to jump in first, and then Chris, you've been active in monitoring policies in Montana and Idaho in the legislature this year and last year. Tom, could you speak a bit to the anti or antagonistic attitudes towards carnivores in Wyoming that really you think sets a really bad precedent for delisting grizzly bears that exists? And Chris, would you follow up on that and talk about some of the worry areas that you see here too? So Tom, jump in, please.
Well, there's little tolerance the further you get away from Jackson in the parks for grizzlies or wolves. I mean, there's a wolf shot. There actually was one of the study wolves in a pack in Colorado, but it was shot it's actually by the Wildlife Services, Fish and Wildlife Agriculture Department, Wildlife Services, which are the most heinous group of officials in probably, I don't know, North America, certainly. I mean, they wouldn't even tolerate a collared wolf, an experimental wolf from Colorado crossing the border in Wyoming. And there's so much pressure from the agricultural community and the good old boys and the hunters and the haters of anything that's considered a carnivore. And it's a culture that I think really needs to hopefully change sometime. It won't happen in my lifetime, I'm afraid, but with the kind of hate that we experience with the guy from Daniel, who's 50 miles south of here, a little town, ran over a wolf with a snow machine and injured it badly, and then taped its muzzle shut with duct tape and took it home and took a nap and ate lunch and gave the wolf to its dogs for a little bit to play with and terrorize and hurt more. And then he took it to the bar to show it off and take selfies. I mean, that's pretty heinous and that's pretty hateful. I mean, you can't even imagine what kind of human being that is. But the governor, it's become a worldwide story that it went viral, and Wyoming really didn't make Wyoming look very good, and didn't make the governor look very good. And he recoiled sort of. He's going to have a meeting. This is kind of a, this is cruelty beyond acceptance. He said, we're going to change this. We're going to make it. We're going to give protection for wolves and coyotes, which coyotes are they do that every day for fun. I can't remember what the name of it is, but they have a name. They're running down coyotes and killing them. But so the governor said, we're going to change this. And then everybody's all excited. Oh, the governor's going to do something. And then 6 weeks later, after things calmed down a little bit, he said, well, he got pressure from the ranchers and stuff. And he said, well, we're going to make a compromise. You can still run over wolves with a snow machine in the snow, run them down and run them over, but they have to be dead. You can't take them to the bar anymore. You can't take them out and show them off, take pictures, not dead. You got to make sure they're dead. You can torture the hell out of them. You can just run them down in deep snow, but they got to be dead. So that's a compromise. So it's incredibly cruel and inhumane. And tell our officials and our legislature or game commissioners or game and fish, stop this sort of real cruelty. I mean, I read in the news of Fish and Game last week where they're going to let hunters, people with guns, shoot prairie dogs out of their car window, so they don't have to get out of the car and walk 20 feet, which they used to have to do. And they can just mist, as they call them. Let's go out and mist some prairie dogs with their high-powered rifles, and you can imagine what that mist is. It's just poof. I mean, what the hell? Prairie dog. What kind of person are you? And now they're going to have proposed, black bears being hunted with dogs, like cougars are hunted with dogs. And they go up a tree and they shoot them, and they leave half the time, or 40% of the time, they leave orphan kittens behind to starve to death. And that's actually legal, and that's one of their game animals. Prairie dogs aren't game; they're just trash animals. They're just for hunters and stuff, or for sad people, just targets, the vermin. And we have game species, we have non-game species. And the non-game species you can pretty much do anything with. And now you can do pretty much anything with wolves. That's why when they take it off the endangered species list, you can run them over with a snow machine, but you have to kill them before you can't drag them around. So we need a whole new paradigm in game management. I think, in across the states, there's some better than others, but Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho who want to delist grizzlies, and they want to, quote, sport hunt grizzlies. And why would you kill such a sentient animal that is intelligent, has emotions, feels pain, anguish, loss? That's what we're talking about. Shouldn't be talking about goddamn numbers. You'd be talking about killing something that's sentient and beautiful for fun. Put a rug on the floor, put the head on the wall. I mean, that's really sick behavior to me. And until we start realizing that, until the game fish or Fish and Wildlife, whoever, starts helping, stop this, misting prairie dogs, for Christ's sake, how are we going to ever evolve? We're just back in the 18th, 19th century.
Thank you for that, Tom. Chris, could you jump in here too? You've been working on the legislative side in Montana, and share with our viewers some of the things that have disturbed you there. And after this, we have people who are asking what they can do. So I want to ask both of you after this what people can do. So could you describe some of the draconian measures that you've seen coming down the pike?
Well, it's unfortunate that these legislatures are often fixated on carnivores. And not all the legislators, but some of them are fixated on the idea that if you can eliminate the carnivores, then everybody will have more deer and elk out there, or they have to save the deer and the elk from the wolves and the black bears and the grizzly bears. I mean, in these states, they allow hound hunting of black bears where grizzly bears are present. That's going to result in dead grizzly bears as those hounds mix it up with grizzly bears. They allow wolf trapping and neck snaring with bait where grizzly bears are present and when grizzly bears are out of the den. They pay people bounties to kill wolves in Idaho and Montana. completely unethical and not fair chase. They allow the shooting of wolves over bait at night with spotlights or thermal imaging scopes. That's going to result in lots of other animals being killed because they're shooting at night in the dark. And that's certainly unethical. It's not fair chase hunting. And they continually demonize predators to justify unnecessary killing. And, they spend so much time on coming up with ways to kill wolves. And many of these wolf killing mechanisms are also going to result in dead grizzly bears. And, we have, in the Montana Wildlife Federation, we've testified, we've written to them, we've pointed out these problems. They just go right by it. It doesn't matter to them. And, there's no reason for this kind of attitude about predators. Seems to be an abnormal hatred of predators. It's not based on facts. It's basically the anti-predator attitudes of the 1800s. And there's no way that we can have normal wildlife management with this anti-predator attitude. We should be using science and facts to base our wildlife management decisions, not emotions and hatred of predators.
Thank you. We're going to give Tom the last word, but before we do, Tom, Chris, what are a couple of things that people who have been tuning in tonight and are yearning for suggestions of what they can do, what would you suggest that people do?
Well, I think right now, the only thing that can save us from the terrible things that are happening to agencies right now is to write your congressman and call your congressman, and don't do it just once. Repeatedly contact them and tell them what your concerns are. Always be polite, be factual, but continuously do it, and I know people that call their congressman every day, and they have their congressional phone numbers on their phone, and they call them every day. That's what it's going to take, because the only people that can stop the destruction of American science and American management systems like grizzly bears and wild country is Congress. Congress needs to step in and stop this administration. So please contact your congressman and do it repeatedly. Do it all the time.
Thank you for that. And Tom, you started the Mangelsen Conservation Fund, which seeks to elevate awareness and be a voice, help people have a stronger voice. Tell us a little bit about that. That website, if Siler could put that up so that people can see the URL address for that. But what do you think people should do, and what motivated you to found the Thomas D. Mangelsen Wildlife Conservation Fund?
Well, I founded the fund kind of a year or so ago before 399 passed, and she gave more impetus to the fund. And what we want to do is to give voice to those who can't speak, like 399, and put funding, raise some funds. We're going to try to have we're having a monument bronze sculpture made in her honor and put it in Jackson and honor her legacy, and try to just protect habitat, everything we're talking about, habitat and animals across the landscape. And I think what people can do is, and I totally agree with Chris, we really need to raise hell. What's the senator's name that said we need to raise good to hell, or what was it? He passed away. Anyway, I'm heartened by all the people that are going on the streets, and with Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders and AOC, I think Chris said earlier that before we went on that there was 8,000 people in Bozeman and
Missoula,
and another 1,100 outside. We couldn't get in. And 35,000 yesterday I saw on the news. Big numbers, considering nothing like Donald Trump has. I tell you that. It wasn't record, but it was. But we need to fight what's going on. I mean, this is criminal. All of these agencies that are being dispensed by Musk and Trump. we really need to stand up and really need to speak out and race out. I think it's great to call your congressman, great to call your legislators, and we need to do all of that times 10. But I'm really disappointed in what's happening in the U.S. and our image and what's happening to all the agencies, not only Chris's agency, X agency, and all that, but we are just in a terrible place in the world right now. Terrible place. So I just hope people will, and I don't know if there's an answer, but being on the streets, calling your congressman, writing them, but speaking out loudly, the incredible USAID, lots of USAID, poor people dying and starving to death, and incredible dumb stuff that they're closing down, and it's just really difficult, hard time for us. But we really need to stand up and scream.
I think that what both of you just said is so profoundly moving. The West, everything that we love about the West, which is premised on public lands and wildlife and open spaces, seems to be under siege right now. And we assumed during our lives that that would never change, but it is changing and changing rapidly. A big part of this too is the guaranteed right to be able to comment on government decisions, which Dr. Servheen knew full and well, that citizens are stakeholders in all of this. And if we lose this, we will lose a foundational aspect of how we relate to the land and our wildlife heritage and things like that. If I may, Tom, just put in one plug for Yellowstonian. If you guys have any thoughts on what Yellowstonian does, but I think journalism has a role in this, Yellowstonian.org, and I've spoken to both of you about this. If you have anything to say on the value of journalism in keeping people informed, I'd love to hear it.
It's huge, Todd. Your article you wrote last week that I read a couple of days ago is fabulous. And your information is on Yellowstonian, and I can't believe that how prolific you are and how much knowledge you know about the different issues and how you write about them. And I just, I'm glad I'm your friend, and thank you for doing the Yellowstonian and all of that. It's a really important journalism. Has a great. I mean, I read the journalism from Billy Arnold from the Jackson Hole News, how he sort of nailed it's really hard. It was hard for me to put the time frame in there about what happened at 399. Without that journalism, I wouldn't have been able to kind of do it. And I've talked to Billy Arnold quite a bit. It's about 2 hours into the day that 399ers died, and he told me what the sequence of things and stuff. Incredibly important to people like Chris and I, to have people like you out there telling the truth and informing us. Yeah,
you're a great avenue for truth, Todd, and we really appreciate what you do. And Yellowstonian is a super source for what's happening across the West, and is fundamental. I refer it to people all the time. And thank you for all you do writing for Yellowstonian and about all these issues. So thank you.
I'm just a stenographer recording, being able to interact with two great guys like you. To all of you who have tuned in, you make a difference. You matter. Do it for your family members and for future generations. And this is a crucial time. One thing I want you to ask of you is write to Tom at the website and tell us if you want to see another Mangelsen live event. We're going to stay vigilant on this. And I want to close out the night. Tom, you just spent some days with the great, best known living conservationist on planet Earth, Dr. Jane Goodall. You were watching cranes. She loves the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, and she adored 399. what's some advice that you would like to share from Jane Goodall with viewers tonight before we sign off?
Well, Jane has been coming out to my cabin in Nebraska to see the cranes for 22 years or so, except for COVID years. And they give it's an ancient bird. It's a symbol for peace, as all cranes are. Long life, mating for life. And what I love about Jane is her hope. She's written a bunch of books about hope. And she doesn't quite, she just closed up in Calgary last night. I got a message to an audience of like 25,000 people or something. I don't know, hell of it. She got a standing ovation before it even started. But she is a symbol for all of us of still having hope and believing in the resiliency of nature. And as she says, the human mind and our hearts. And she's so inspirational to millions, obviously, including me, that it's been such a gift to know her and to see that she doesn't give up. She's just turned 91 on April 4th. And she's been all over the world and since then, since she was in Nebraska. And I told her that I'm glad she's not a U.S. citizen. She's a British citizen at this time, because it's hard to be trashed, like trashing Canada. Canadians are wonderful people and our best allies. And to have them turn against us and boo the American anthem, very sad for me. But Jane, they gave us standing ovation. If you get a chance, read some of her works and be inspired and get some more hope than I might have right now. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks again to all of you who have tuned in between Tom Mangelsen and Dr. Chris Servheen, a century of advocacy for wildlife there. Again, do what you can, be inspired by what you heard from these guys tonight. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks, Tom and Chris, for your words of wisdom tonight.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. Good night.
Rainy days don't seem so wet. Stormy nights don't stay. From the moment that we met, you were worth the wait. Oh, this could be the best thing that I'll ever know. Talk for hours and never slept. Two silhouettes on the concrete steps. We watched the sun as it slowly crept from the horizon to the place we met. Oh, this could be the best thing that I'll ever know.